Morning, everyone. I'm honored to serve as president of Miami Beach United and really excited tonight to discuss the residents' right to know. It's an initiative which is one of our highest priorities. So I want to welcome everyone who's here this evening, and I especially want to welcome our dues-paying members who are really the lifeblood of our organization. We really, really appreciate that. As we begin, I want to acknowledge a few special folks in the audience, if I could. First, I noticed an elected official, Commissioner Michael Rico is here, who's also a candidate for mayor. Commissioner Mickey Steinberg is here, who's also a candidate for the commission. I saw Commissioner John Alamont, who is here, and I believe that is our elected officials here. I also want to acknowledge, as we are in an election year, believe it or not, I believe I did see Dan Gelber, who is here, standing there, who is a candidate for mayor. And we have some commission candidates. Robert Landsberg, who is right up in the front. Josh Levy is with us in the back. Zach Eisner is also here. Did I miss anyone who's elected or candidate? Okay. Good. We're glad you're all here with us this evening. I also want to acknowledge our volunteer board of directors that really makes this stuff happen. And we have a great group. So I'm just going to click through some of the folks if they could raise their hand. Our founder and chairwoman emeritus, Nancy Lehman, is here, right over there. Great job. You'll be hearing from Michael Barano, who's in the front. Tanya Bott is with us in the back. George Exposito is going to join us on the panel. Christine Flores is also with us in the back. Herb Frank is here tonight. George Gonzalez, Mike Hammond are also here. Stacy Kilroy. Adam Kravitz is with us. Mark Needle, you'll be hearing from Mark. He's in our front row, one of our keynotes. Gabriel Paez is with us as well. Kirk Pascal is here. Michael Rittis is also with us in the blue there. Ron Starkman and Fern Watts also. So that's your board that really has helped put this together. They're doing a great job for all of us. Just a couple other acknowledgments before we get rolling. I want to thank my better half, Laura Dominguez, who makes this stuff happen and checking everyone in. Thank you, Laura. And a real big thank you to our gracious host, the Miami Beach Women's Club. They are just fabulous. Allison Kohlberg is just amazing to work with. If Allison is here, I'd love to have her come up and say a word or two if she's available. And if she's not, we'll get her towards the end. Allison? Yep, I think she's going to make a guest appearance. That's great.
Hello, everyone. Has anybody been here? Is this their first time here, or have you all been here? Anybody first time? Yeah. First time. Oh, okay. All right. So I'm sorry, everybody else. I'm going to do the history again real quick. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the Miami Beach Women's Club. As you can see, we are in a beautiful historic venue that was built in 1933 for the Miami Beach Women's Club. The Women's Club was started in 1926 here in Miami Beach, right after the Great Hurricane. And a group of affluent women, the first one was Elizabeth Cedric Cooper, along with Carl Fisher's wife, who I'm drawing a blank on her first name. Jane. Thank you, Jane Fisher. They started the Miami Beach Women's Club as an effort to reach out to the community and help the people that had lost everything in that hurricane. And from there, they continued to meet and foster community and friendship. And what I find so interesting is that in 1926, this group of women went out to the community, and on our website you'll see the speech. I can't recall the exact words she said, but Elizabeth Cedric Cooper said, no matter if you're from the north, the south, the east, or the west, we are now one community, and we're here to help you. So to me, that was really amazing, and for those days to be so all-encompassing and inviting all those people to be part of Miami Beach. And the women continued to meet, and in 1933, Carl Fisher was so impressed with the things they were doing here in the beach that he donated the land that this building was built on. The ladies commissioned Russell Pankos to build this building, and this is it today. And my boss, Alan Lieberman, he bought this building several years ago and took 3 years to restore it to the way it was. So you're sitting in a piece of history, and I hope you enjoyed the meeting tonight. And also just want to remind you, as most of you know, I do weddings, parties, and special events right here in this room. So if you know of anyone, or you yourself are planning a party, please get in touch with me. Take one of my cards on your way out from the Hutch Council in the entrance hall. You'll see my cards there. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Allison. I will personally vouch she does a great job. So easy to work with and a wonderful venue. So let's roll up our sleeves and dive in. There's a lot we're going to cover tonight. We're really excited about it. There's a lot happening in the city, and often residents are involved, and that leads to good outcomes. But it's fair to say that sometimes residents have not been as engaged as they need to be, and we need to be. So Miami Beach United, based on significant input from the community and neighborhood associations, has created this initiative. It's called the Residents' Right to Know. In a nutshell, the Residents' Right to Know will grant increased rights to Miami Beach residents to know what's happening in their neighborhood and have a meaningful engagement in that process. You know what's happening, and you will be able to have a seat at the table as opposed. You received a copy of a draft ordinance, so there's actually some real hard work that's gone on. And this will be a process where we anticipate that ordinance, with the Commission's support, of course, will be passed in the coming few months. We will then test drive this new way of the city engaging with residents. And then ultimately, because we think it's so important, we anticipate and will drive hard to put this into the charter so it's part of our Citizens' Bill of Rights. So I hope tonight that you'll see the progress that's been made. I hope you're enthused about where we're going, and that you will help us by providing input and also providing your voice to our elected officials and of course to candidates who are here as well. Tonight you're going to hear from a panel of resident leaders who will tell you some examples of how this has played out. You'll hear from one of our prime architects, Mark Needle, who will talk to you. But first, we're going to get a view from the mainland, because other cities have recognized the need to increase their rights, and Miami recently did this through a charter referendum. So let me just briefly introduce to you Stephen Hurwitz. He's a full-time resident in Miami since 1997, and a part-time resident for 8 years before that. When he retired in 1997, he worked as a strategic management consultant for the federal government, major corporations, and not-for-profits on a part and full-time basis. As he explained to me in a number of our preparatory discussions, his motivation for getting involved in local issues came from a simple request. He just wanted to know what was happening in his city. And where that led him was going to court, finding a pattern of wrongdoing, including violations of law. And I think he'll tell us a little bit about that. So, Stephen?
Thank you, Mark. The right to know is really how this all happened with me. Before this issue, I was almost entirely international security affairs and subject like this. So there's a bit of a learning curve down here to do with local government. But I was curious about a project that had been approved, and so I asked for some public records. And I didn't get it. So I went to court to get it. And I still didn't get them. And I spent a lot of money getting them. And when I found them, I understood why they didn't give them to me. Because buried in what they were doing were illegalities, both of the City of Miami Charter and of the county's Truth in Government. A very important piece of work that you should be able to benefit from. So I got the documents, actually brought them over to the commission in the summer of 2013, to the Miami Beach Commission then. Horrified, they voted unanimously to oppose the project I was talking about, which is the Flagstone project on Watson Island, because it would have ended the relationship between Miami Beach and Miami, to put it in short form, for those of you who know California, people do not go to LA and Santa Monica, they go to one or the other. So I didn't have anything else to do, that was fine. But they decided, Perez and Ross pulled out, and the developers decided to continue. Well, they continue to this day. And I've been fighting it one way or another. When I finally went to court to challenge the corruption and the violation of law, the case was dismissed on the basis of standing. I was one of 5 cases that did this on different projects, Skyrise and Grove Bay and New World Center, and they were all dismissed. And the 3rd District Court of Appeal approved those dismissals on standing, reversing 80 years of precedent. In examining what happened with that, because it shocked everyone, the city attorney had promoted this. This is relevant. I'm not accusing anybody in the city or the city attorney's office of anything specific, but the city attorney fought this and in fact encouraged the court to deny standing. Because, to be charitable, she was defending the city's interest the way she best thought how, and without any regard for what the facts were. The less charitable is that she wanted to block trials because she was a participant that would have come out on her own in some of the problems that we were attacking. So we lost the 3rd DCA, and these other cases began to lose. I sat down with a well-known constitutional lawyer. He actually is the counsel to the Miami Beach City, so he may not be able to help you with this particular case if you go there, but we talked about it. And he wrote a charter amendment to the City of Miami Charter. We got it through the Charter Review Committee, which happened to be there, but the signature authority, which may be easier here, is available to put it on the charter. It passed in the referendum with 84.32% of the vote. If you have any qualms about whether the public's going to support their right to know and their ability to challenge their government, that will tell you a lot. In the city of Miami, only one issue of the 12 issues that were before, whether they're state, county, or local, one issue was higher, and that was the issue of helping first responders who are disabled in their line of work. State provision. And that only passed about a point higher than ours. So I'm giving you those numbers because I want to encourage you to think about, if you educate the citizens about it, you can accomplish a lot, whether or not your government wants you to. Very important. So what we did is, after we got it on the ballot, we strategically decided to do a low-key campaign because the developers who had their interests had a lot more money and a lot more effort, and we worried about that. We put together a list of 45,000 names in the city of Miami. We communicated with them regularly. We built a website, and there were some articles. You can't depend on the papers very much, although I think you may get better coverage in the Herald than Miami does, frankly. But it's not a reliable way to win a war. And the way to win a war is to talk to the people and communicate with them and get them to understand it, and that's an important lesson. So we got there in terms of victory. Now, one of the things also that I want to help motivate you with is that Miami-Dade County is an unusual county in the state. There are only 2 or 3, and I don't remember the others because they're far away. Miami-Dade County is a home rule county. It is not just a legislative design district. It is important because a charter amendment here in your charter is part of the Constitution of the state of Florida. And it is extremely hard for the court system to overrule your own charter. They can, there are ways of doing it, and if it's obviously inconsistent with other parts of the Constitution, but when inconsistent with the state law, maybe they can't. Inconsistent with your own rules and stuff, it becomes precedent, and they have no right to turn it over. So you've got a little bit more freedom here than elsewhere, and it's really, really worth doing. There's another reason to go this route in the right to hear and the right to know and the right to act, and that is that we're in a peculiar county and that there's nowhere else to go with you people. We have a state attorney who doesn't enforce the law publicly. We have a commission on ethics who, if you're an office holder above a certain level, does not care. When I challenged I took a case to the Commission on Ethics, and the public advocate, who was supposed to represent the public, recommended no probable cause. The commission voted 5-0. I went back to the commission, 30-page brief, 200 pages of document, and said, your public advocate is biased or incompetent, which was a charged expression, which the commission discussed. They didn't approve of my language, but they did reopen the case, because it was so clear that when I pointed out to them that over the previous 30 months, the advocate's recommendation was approved by the commission 98.5% of the time. So the commission had delegated authority. It had no legal right to delegate. And besides which, his no probable cause, 66% of the cases record. The only time we found probable cause is if you were a certain race that wasn't white, or if you were poor, or if you were a junior person who was caught, taking some fuel out of your government car or something. They simply didn't prosecute serious officials. So there's nowhere to go there. Now, that's in court right now, because the assistant city attorney whom I took and who said the things she said, when she lost, she has now sued the Commission on Ethics. It's the city attorney of the city of Miami, sued the Commission on Ethics, saying that they don't have the right to reopen their own cases. I hope they get you surprised. I mean, even the Commission on Ethics had to side with me on that one because it meant they couldn't supervise their staff, period. And that's pending. Part of the tactic is to put it off long enough that she's close to retirement, and it sort of becomes moot. And then we have people within governments, sometimes politicians, sometimes staff, who sometimes prioritize things differently. They prioritize, for instance, the let me save the city at any cost and I'll break the law to do it. That's what happened in the city, and I have some reason to believe it's not that completely rare here either. And so we can't go always to the politicians, or we can't always go to the city attorneys to defend them. And then you get to the 11th Circuit Court, which is really basically a court that doesn't deal with public policy issues. They don't know how, they're afraid, and they take their orders from the 3rd District Court of Appeals, because if they want any promotions, etc., they sort of have an input on it. So that system isn't really available. So doing what you're talking about doing, and demanding the rights in the form of a charter, and then exercising them, is really the only place left to go. The only extra problem that's a little hard is finding lawyers who will do it with you, because most of the big firms make a lot more money defending people's corruption than they do helping with integrity. So good luck with it. I'm happy to answer some questions later. I'll be here if you have some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. We're going to head on up here. So very helpful to see this is happening in other cities. Miami's a wonderful example. Very insightful comments. One number stuck there, 84%. When you ask residents whether they should have a little more say in their lives and what's happening in their neighborhoods, they tend to think that's a good idea. 84%. Excellent. So we've gotten a view from other locations, specifically Miami, but let's look closer to home here in Miami Beach. Now we know that on good days our government is listening and things are working well. But I think we all have a sense that there are opportunities for it to be better. And we felt it would be helpful to hear from some leaders in terms of their real experiences when there's been situations where, frankly, residents were not informed, residents were not engaged, and the outcomes were less than desirable. So I'm going to introduce this panel and tell you what they're going to talk about. Then they're going to each take 3 minutes and just give you a little snippet of what happened in their situation, how residents were involved or not involved, and what the results are. And they promise me they'll do it in 3 minutes because they know I'll take their mic away if they don't. All right, in the order that they're going to speak, to my left is George Exposito, former commissioner, president of the Bayshore Neighborhood Association. He is going to talk about building a convention center hotel without the support of the community. Michael Barano is towards him. Michael's the former president of SOFR. He is a director, as is George, of Miami Beach United. He's also been a panelist up here. He's going to talk about what happened in the Marriott South Beach, south of 5th, and what he refers to as the dark period. To our right here is Tom Richardson. Tom is a leader in the North Beach neighborhood, and he's going to talk about a little park up there, Allison Park, and how he led a group effort to preserve Allison Park for the neighborhood. A couple down there is Robert Landsberg. Everyone knows Robert. Robert led a very strong effort known as Stop the Train, and he's going to talk about how citizens played a critical role. And finally, to my right is Glenda Phipps. Glenda is the treasurer of the North Beach Neighborhood Alliance. She is the treasurer there and has been active in a number of issues, including the North Shore Open Space Park. So she's going to talk a little bit about that and what happened. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to George. We'll make our rounds for 3 minutes of case studies on these situations. George, if you want to kick us off here?
Certainly. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. If you look up at the title of what I'm talking about, building a hotel without the community, you think I'm giving you a tutorial of how to get around getting community input, but quite the contrary. We've already gotten that lesson. What I'm here to talk to you today is the importance of community involvement anytime the city has to do something that affects the community and has a major impact. In the case of the convention center has been studied for over a decade. And in 2010, the decision was made to move forward and to select a group of individuals to build a convention center and a convention center hotel, recognizing that one without the other was not going to be appropriate because you would not be able to fuel the proper economy for tourist purposes. This was vetted. It was an 11-month process to establish who the top groups were, and finally a group was selected. After that long and lengthy process, some of us left office and a new group came in. At that time, the decision was made that we should not proceed with the vetting process that's gone forward, and because also some legislation that went through bifurcating the process between the convention center and the hotel, they moved forward with a selection process. And that selection process brought you a convention center at a cost that's going to be almost double of what the previous convention center proposal was, and a hotel which was voted down by the community because there was actually no impact whatsoever. I find it funny that we're sitting up here, we're talking about Citizens' Bill of Rights. When I was elected to office in 2010, one of the first things that George Gonzalez, our then city manager, said with me was to explain to me what the process was, get me to understand how citizens' input was important, and to show me the diagram of how the citizens are on top, the mayor and commission, and then the rest of the staff. You know, that famous triangle, organizational chart triangle, which in all reality should have really been flipped over. we sit up here and discuss citizens' bill of rights, and I find it sometimes funny that we have to have a serious conversation about a form of government that is a participatory government where the citizens have an actual right and ability to voice their concerns and have an impact on what goes on, not only in their single-family neighborhoods, but also within the city that they lived. Or within the city they live, excuse me. Although lately it's within the city they lived. As more and more of our residents are leaving because they're fed up. So, to wrap it up, we have now established a blue ribbon panel to address the issues. We're looking at whether or not, and that blue ribbon panel, I have to give credit, MBU was very instrumental in pushing forward. And what we're looking at is whether the necessity, number one, still exists, whether that necessity is for 1,200, 800, or possibly less rooms, and how we can do this with now recognizing that we need the citizen participation to get this process moving forward. Because we've built a hotel, a convention center, at a cost of almost $700 million, and we don't have the hotel to accommodate the necessity. To close up, I challenge the individuals here tonight, as part of the commission and youth who are running for office, make Miami Beach a participatory form of government once again, because we have lost that as of late, and we need to be able to have a voice. Because unless citizens have a voice and a direct impact on what happens, it's just going to continue to be chaos, and the cost overruns and everything that occurs is going to continue to occur. Because we have a very intelligent and very participatory base of citizens, and we need to take advantage of that.
Thank you, George. Michael?
Thank you, George. Thank you, Mark and the panel. So I've been living in Miami Beach as long as many of you. I've been here 6 years, and I've fallen in love with Miami Beach in many, many ways. But consistently, I'm disappointed. I remind folks that Miami Beach was founded by a real estate developer, and in many ways, not much has changed. Is the goal to build out the beach? Is the goal to build out the real estate assets, or do we residents have, a say? So if you've stood still long enough and been around me, you've heard me talk about this. I feel really passionate about it, that residents we need more balance on this issue. Residents need a greater voice. As a board member with the South and Fifth Neighborhood Association over the past 3 years, until recently, we were confronted with situation after situation where, in many ways, the fix was in, the goose was cooked, the decisions were made by the time we found out the project was even on the board. We worked hard to change that and made some progress. One of the most egregious examples that Mark spoke of, that Marriott South Beach, residential, residents across the street and just to the north. Historic building in a historic district. Project didn't go to the Historic Preservation Board. Project was never, we didn't, as residents, we knew nothing about it. First time we found out about it, they had poked a big, massive 10-foot hole in the side of the exterior wall. That's how we found out that the project was going on. And so it's just been an 18-month process trying to get some kind of, trying to have some kind of feedback about this project. So, it's happened to us many times, maybe not quite as, but we get 11th hour phone calls. I get phone calls from, folks on some of the city boards. Hey, there's something going on in your neighborhood. Do you know anything about it? I'm like, nope, never heard of it. Well, can you come down here tomorrow and speak? Because we'd like to hear what you guys think about it.
Every 3 months, write to somebody at the city to find out the status of this playground. I kept writing and sending my emails, and would get a response back saying, oh, it's still in the beginning planning phase. We're not anywhere close to it, but when we get further along, we'll let you know. So I kept writing and writing and writing, and I kept getting the same response. Eventually, I got the response of, well, it's starting to be planned a little bit, but there's going to be community meetings. It's going to be, don't worry, we'll let you know. And I said, well, as president of the condo board, I'd like to update the condo. So I was actually on vacation. My wife's Italian. I was in Italy. I had really bad jet lag. And I got an email from somebody at the city. Luckily, our kids go to the same school. And so she decided to email me the link for the meeting that was going to be presented, the finished plans. That was supposed to be on September 2nd. I had jet lag, so I decided to flip through the stuff in the middle of the night. And I saw a big building in the middle of the park that was going to be built. When I got back to the next board meeting, I said to everybody, do you guys know anything about this? They're building a building up to 50 feet across the street. Nobody knew anything, and in fact, they basically told me, oh, that couldn't be possible. That's a government-owned playground. There's no way they can build a building over there. So it was the same response that you guys have in the sense that it's kind of all hidden from you, because I was actively trying to find out for almost a year and a half what the plans were, and I was not being able to get any progress. And it was only because I decided to look through the commission agenda and find the plan. And then I said, well, does anybody know about this? When's the city, this community meeting we're going to have to get people's input? And again, they said, well, it's coming up, don't worry about it. And the next email I got was, oh, by the way, it's on the commission agenda for September 2nd. There's going to be no community meetings, and it's ready to go. So I decided to read the thing, write it up, and go to all the other buildings around the neighborhood, thinking that they probably didn't know what we didn't know. And I said, is there the president of the board in the building? And people started saying, well, just leave your letter behind. And I left my email address, and I started getting emails. Bing, 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 bing. What do you know about this? What's happening? What's going on over at the park? Eventually, we had 17 buildings. Not one of them knew anything about it. All of the board directors said, we'll support whatever we can because we don't think this is right. I got people that were at Time Magazine, ex-writers saying, hey, I'm retired. What do you want me to do? What can I do? The problem is that most people are Indians, and they're looking for some direction. And there's no real direction. You know, I got a full-time job, I got a young daughter, I have my own business. And so you say, well, who's going to take the reins by the, the bull by the horns and proceed with this? Nobody really wanted to, but a lot of people said, whatever you're going to do, let me know, I'm willing to help. So I did, started to get everybody organized and stuff. But it was so frustrating because we wanted to find out, we just wanted a voice. And we were basically told, no, it's already done. You just can show up to the meeting. And I said, well, if that's the only thing we can do is show up to the meeting, then I'm going to get a lot of people to show up to the meeting. I think we had 70 people the first meeting. I bought all green t-shirts so they knew who we were and couldn't say, these people don't care about the issue. But from that experience, I've gotten more involved in other things. I've met Robert, I was helping him do the things on the train. I fought against the convention center city, the hotel that they were going to put up there because I thought the traffic was too bad. I've been on other issues. We did all the meetings for the North Beach revitalization, the Ocean Terrace, and et cetera, et cetera. And everybody says the same thing. Why don't they listen to the people? The outcome is better if you get some community input at the beginning of the process instead of waiting until the end where everybody's pissed. And then when you show up and you're pissed, they say 3 minutes from each side, or 3 speakers, and you can't, and then the lobbyist gets to rebuke what you have to say, and they get all their chances to say whatever they want. You never get a chance to go up there and talk again. And that's the one voice that should be heard the most. So that's my experience. It's very frustrating. The outcomes are better when the community is involved from the beginning to the end, in my opinion.
Next up, we have Robert Landsberg.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been living in a movie. Last July commission meeting, those words I'll never forget. It's a done deal. We don't need the public's vote. I was truly saddened. For the next 7 days, I circled my neighborhood and spoke with my neighbors. Nobody knew. 1 week later, light rail was back on the agenda. When I asked the mayor if I could speak, no, We are not taking public comment. This is not part of the process. I had worked with city commissioners to improve my neighborhood. Together we installed a radar speed limit sign, changed the lightning policy at Flamingo Park, shaded South Point Park playground, even got the Thriller boat to stop honking their horn. You can call me a squeaky wheel. With one quick presentation to our HOA and one city-sponsored event, the streetcar was being fast-tracked, and agencies such as the DOT, NPO, Dade County, City of Miami Beach had all signed a memorandum of understanding and authorized millions of dollars in expenses. Terms such as P3, interoperability, connectivity, modern streetcar. One felt this project was unstoppable. The sale of the Miami Beach Marina for $100 million, special taxing districts, federal and state grants, even the entrance of a candidate for state senate to support the rail initiative. Fear and intimidation were part of this recipe. With warnings from friends and neighbors like be careful and it's done, don't even try, I took to social media. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook. Likes and shares, the new currency in the social media age. Stop the Train Miami Beach has 750 friends, 141 posts, and 13 videos. I have personally distributed over 6,000 flyers and have made over 14 public appearances as a face of opposition to the train to nowhere. A project 3 years in the making, unbeknownst to the public. In November, the commissioner flipped his position publicly, and the mayor announced a resolution which was passed in December calling for a suspension of activities on the rail initiative. The resolution is not a charter amendment and is no guarantee. To date, we have spent approximately $8 million and have a new Department of Transportation at the City of Miami Beach with over 11 employees. It will celebrate their 3-year anniversary in April. I have been living in a movie, a horror movie. Because of these actions, I'm putting my name on the ballot for the November election for commissioner. I am a native of Miami Beach and would never railroad our beautiful city and its residents. As a resident, I want to know. As a candidate, I promise transparency and a big dose of common sense. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to go last because North Shore Open Space Park is actually still happening, so there's a chance to do something. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to be talking today about the redesign of North Shore Open Space Park. And if you don't know where the park is, it's on Collins between 79th and 87th. It's 36 acres of beautiful beachfront, barbecues, dog park, children's park, one of the few places we have that's not developed. I'm going to speak today a little bit about what's been going on, and I think you'll see in the story where having known more would have saved so many problems, and I'm hoping that we can still turn this ship around a little bit. But I'm going to start the story a little ways back. As an English teacher, it's always important where you start the story, and I think one of the issues with North Shore Open Space Park is happens to be the fact that in 2013, do you remember the Desertland, the Biltmore Terrace, Howard Johnson's at 87th? If you don't, it's not there anymore. It is now the Renzo Piano condominiums. But right at the northern end of North Shore Open Space Park in 2013, the Terror Group came around to the community and were asking for support from us to get a height increase for 200 feet from 60 beachfront property. And many of us were not crazy about it, but there was the promise that they were going to preserve the part of the structure. The minute they got the DRB approval for their 200 feet, they started demolition, I think maybe the day after, was that it? And came forward also a 6.5 million, I don't know what the word is, contribution, appearance, to support the transformation of North Shore Open Space Park. So I tell you that story a little bit just to let you know that there's good reason when people see things happening in the park to think that perhaps something is happening that's not quite open, what's going on. They've been seeing things. So that's exactly what happened. The redesign began in this last fall. There was actually an open meeting by West 8, who's in charge of the design, and they were sharing their plans. Everyone was, you know, a little input, happy. Maybe some of you were there. They promised they would come back and share it with us soon, so we could give some more input, and lo and behold, in December, we start to see things happening in the park. Trees with X's on them, things were disappearing, things were moving around, and from there appeared a petition by a man, Juan Pablo Ortega, which is now up to 1,000, maybe some of you signed it. What's happening in North Shore Open Space Park? They're taking out the trees, it's going to be privatized, and you can kind of see where some of that came from the Biltmore Terrace issue. None of that was true, but it began to create this whole engine of interest. Around that time when the petition came up, we started to get emails at North Beach Neighbors Alliance. What's going on? Have you seen the petition? What's the truth? Are they giving this away? Blah, blah, blah. Long story short, we also looked and saw that the plans were on the DRB for January. Quickly, we asked for a deferral from Commission. Thankfully, Commissioner Grieco reached out to us and was helpful in that, and we got it deferred from DRB, and we also got an ask so that a public meeting could be held, so that a little bit more transparency could come out. That happened January 24th. There was a January 27th meeting at Neighbors, and where we are now is hopeful that some of our input, and the public meeting was very well attended. A lot of input was given. I think no one really has an issue with the design. What we're really left with now is of great concern to many is the trees being removed. We have many species there that are protected, and we're asking for an inventory of what's going on there. But with like all of these things, we're asking, we're pushing, we're pulling, getting information. I'm Facebook messaging people who I see are doing the petitions, that we're not all coordinated, involved. And it really came to a head for me when I was watching. Yes, I'm one of those weird people who watches the DRB meetings from my office. In the February DRB meeting, there was a line item there for it to be shared, the plans again. It was deferred, but unfortunately someone had actually shown up to come speak, right? And was interested in what was happening. They saw it on there. They had no idea. They asked the chair, what can I do? She said, well, you should speak to Jeff Forrest. The person said, well, who's Jeff Forrest? You know, you see yourself, if you've been involved in any of these things, not understanding the process and wanting so much to know what to do. And I think that comes through in all of our stories.
One of the things that struck me about really most everyone's comment was this sense of inevitability that seems to develop. You know, it just reaches this. I mean, there's this, you know, it's just over, and residents aren't involved. So, interesting. I can relate. So,
no, that's right on. There are a couple other things too that come through from these stories. In addition to the inevitability, which we heard, these are big deals. We're talking about someone's playground. We're talking about someone's neighborhood and street tracks coming down. These are very important quality of life impacts across these various stories. I think the other things that jump out is residents didn't get the word up front. And in fact, they weren't hearing about it till well down the process. And when they tried to be heard, at least in these examples, they were not as well received as we would like. Now, thankfully, in these cases, we had resident leaders who took their time from their busy lives to step in and make a difference. And for that, we're grateful. But we can't count on that every day of the week. We need to make sure the system is in place so that our rights are safeguarded so that we don't have stories like this going forward. So I think it's clear that we have a problem and we need some help. Thankfully, I'm going to introduce Mark Needle to us. Mark has a law degree from NYU. He does policy and strategic work on education and civic projects. He has been a leader in Flamingo Park. He is a director at Miami Beach United and was co-founder, and I love this name, for the Save Miami Beach Pact. And you all know what that meant. That made a big deal to this community. Mark has worked with the community and our team and has spearheaded our effort. And we believe with the Residents' Rights to Know initiative, we have the start of a solution to address the problem we just heard. So Mark, if you would join us, please.
Okay, in order to not use my glasses to read, I'm boiling it down to 5 words to talk about here. And then I think Mark is going to go through the specifics of the proposed approach, and that'll give a chance to go into some of the details. Let me just say that, first of all, this was described as new practice, new ways of doing things. I think that what we're doing is taking the best practices that the city does when it's working well. And that we've all experienced instances when, in fact, you can work with staff to develop solutions. You can work to develop to effect implementation of things the city does. You can get engaged when there are projects being introduced that have adverse impacts. What we're trying to do, and the city does reach out at times to neighborhood associations. What we're trying to do, I think, is to institutionalize and codify those best practices that work and give us the best results, and make those something that are not just sporadically obeyed, but rather become the law and the practice and the institutionalized way that things should be done in a civic democracy. The second word, so that was the idea of new. The second word I want to deal with is the idea of initiative. This started as a charter change, and we've done charter change before. I think that when we did St. Miami Beach years ago, we started with a single concept, and like the example from Miami, it was emphatically approved despite a whirlwind of opposition and a lot of money. And after that, it led to a series of incremental improvements on that initial step in the right direction. And I'm hoping that what we're doing here is really not an ordinance, which we're going to discuss tonight, but in fact part of a process. We see this as a change in the charter that will strengthen resident rights and make them more clear and make the residents understand their own rights and make the city understand those resident rights in a much more profound and unshakable way. But what we're doing at the request of the city attorney, in apprehension of how to do a charter amendment that's quite powerful in its impact, is that we have agreed to go forward with an ordinance based on the charter. Did we lose power? Okay. And so what we're looking at right now is taking a charter ordinance, which is written in very kind of thin and principled language, but and now we're looking at an ordinance that maybe needs to be fleshed out a bit more. And I want to hope that at the end of the process, this initiative process that we're going through, This ordinance is something that you all will take back to your own neighborhood associations, and that you will look at in terms of the issues that you raised and make sure that this ordinance that we're testing out here, we're allowing the city to test drive this before we go forward with the charter amendment, to make sure how it's going to work, to make sure it's effective. We want to make sure that this ordinance gets as strong as possible at this stage of the game, so that we know that it covers, as one of the secretaries, former secretaries used to say, covers the known knowns. We have a lot of known knowns of what goes wrong when residents don't get notified, don't get the opportunity to speak properly in public processes, when processes happen that never have a public engagement process or component. So we need to address those through this ordinance. The title of the ordinance is the third word title. It's right to know, but implicit in the right to know is the right to engage. Because if you cannot get to the information, if you cannot raise the questions, if you cannot detail how a project or proposal or an idea has negative potential impacts or real impacts on your local neighborhood, then you will never have the right information. The boards, the committees, the commissioners will never have the information of what the real impact of something will be. And so you really never, if you don't have the right to engage, you can never really know the impact of something and therefore address it and make sure that it's been properly vetted and mitigated. The fourth word is the goals of this. For me, a real fundamental starting point here is the idea that the neighborhood associations are a key part of our civic democracy and something that needs to be more clearly engaged with the city, and the city needs to engage with the neighborhood associations. So we're really trying to create a very bright lines of standing for the neighborhood associations to raise issues, to have the city pay attention to those issues formally, notifying the associations when issues are coming up or coming back at them even after they've been dealt with. And so elevating the role of neighborhood and the power of neighborhood associations, I think is an outcome of this process and is something that will really can be a long-term benefit. Then the fifth word is gaps. As I said, this started as a charter amendment. It has since been edited down. What you're seeing right now is actually is not what we're in agreement with. This is what the city attorney has so far approved as a starting point. As we go through the elements of how this works, we'll point out a few of the gaps that are still being debated right now, contested, I would say. And I really think that the more of you who get engaged in this process now, if the stronger we can make the language of the ordinance, the clearer it is, the more cases and instances that are covered, the more value it will be to all of us. And when we go forward with the charter amendment, we will actually have had something that is really in process and working. And I hope we'll cover all of the instances here, because all of them involve basically a frustration of citizens of not knowing how and not being able to properly engage on issues that actually affect their quality of life.
Thank you, Mark. I think it's very places with me here. Mark covered a lot of ground there, as he usually does, in good form. One thing I do want to highlight, he made an excellent point that the city, in many cases has done this right, but that's been, people have sort of
thinking outside the box and doing it right, where what we're trying to do is institutionalize this process going forward, so it's the way we sort of operate as a community. So you guys have been patient. It's time for a little discussion now. You've gotten the highlights, but I really want to try and bring to life, what is this residents' right to know? What exactly we're talking about? And what I'd like to do is touch on a few of the basic themes. And what I'll do is give you a brief primer. I'm going to look to the panel for some comments and feedback in terms of, are we going in the right direction that will help, and what suggestions they have. But I'm also going to open it up to the audience if you have ideas or questions that relate as well. So the first thing to know about the residents' right to know is that we're talking about things that impact quality of life in your neighborhood. What could that be? Could be a range of things. It could be development, could be street work, and one of the hot topics now is streets that are being raised. It could be zoning changes. There might be height increases that are coming. There might be uses of entertainment that are being dealt with. It could be your parks, parking in parks, or the use of parks could be a topic. It could be a range of quality of life impacts. That's the starting point. And if I didn't cover all of them, what we envision is if a neighborhood association or residents just raised their hand and said, on that specific thing, we need to know, then that counts too. So we're talking about a broad range of things, quality of life impacts. That's the starting point. So what happens next? One of these things is coming. What do we do? This is the first key theme that we're going to discuss. Targeted neighborhood notice. What does that mean? Well, in this electronic world we now live in, if we define a certain geography and say I'm south of 5th or I'm in the North Beach neighborhood, and one of these things happen, the neighborhood association or particular residents or condo association can opt in on the list. Now today, the city does not have any legal obligation to notify residents of many of these quality of life impacts. There are exceptions, but generally if they're going to do something, there's no obligation to notify. So the first notice we're going to discuss is the idea that residents and neighborhood associations can opt in and be notified before things take place. So I'm going to open first to the panel, just a broad brush question. Do we think this type of notice would help address the situations you have? What suggestions do you have in terms of how this would best work? Michael.
Absolutely, and not that hard to implement something like that. They're already noticing a lot of boards and different commission, a lot of things. The important thing I think to remember there is it needs to be early enough. Remember at our meeting, George Gonzalez, are you here still? Said that in Bell Harbor, application comes in Friday afternoon. By Monday, whatever time on Monday, it's published on their website for all to see, for everybody to see, anybody to view that's interested. So we need to make sure that whatever goes to planning and zoning, whatever applications are received at planning and zoning are made public immediately. Within a few days, and that's super important.
So you think it would help, and we've got to do it early in the process. Robert.
The city already has some capability. You can sign up for land use notices, planning and zoning. I see this as an extension of that. It really doesn't cost them a whole lot to expand the service and inform us. I think in the case of the train, where we've gone along $9 million or $8 million, have they gotten some consensus and asked some people first? We might have saved that money.
Well, that is of utmost importance, Mark. I think what we need to also do is implement a system where we are actually a citizen being heard. It's not only learning of the process early, but being able to have our input being heard. You have an issue going on in our neighborhood right now where streets are being raised. Streets are being raised between 12 and 19 inches. That is at the crown, I understand. But understand that once you raise a street 19 inches at the crown, the law requires that the slope cannot be more than 2 degrees. So for the benefit of the doubt of the city, we're going to have valley gutters, and we're going to have collection pipes that are 4 feet wide going in under our roads. But what does that do to our property, or where we live? How do we get in and out? Well, the city agrees that they will harmonize the driveway, but speak nothing, or the swale into the driveway, but speak nothing of the area beyond that. And then there is a request that they ask the residents to sign. And that request has not come to our neighborhoods yet because they haven't started. But it basically states that once the project is complete, all stormwater runoff from the right-of-way is designed to be collected through the public drainage system. Perfect. Any stored water, which is now the stormwater that collects on our private property and falls into the swale and goes into the streets that should have been collected via the valley gutters being planned, it says any stormwater from our property is mine and our sole responsibility. So you put me in a predicament where, I'm sorry, I don't care how wide the valley gutter is, you're going to create a cascading effect. And now you've put me in a position where I have to take corrective measures to avoid my property from basically being flooded. My house was built in 1934. The neighbors on my street have, all these homes were built between the 1916s to 1930s. Some have higher elevation, others have elevations that are only a few inches above the actual level of the ground. So what you're doing is in fact saying, you either sell your house and have someone come in and build a big box structure that is elevated 16 inches, or SOL. Too bad, because this water is now your sole responsibility. And this is a clear example of where this process needs to be instituted, folks, because you're not given a say.
So George is describing a very important example. Again, street raising is happening around town. It's clearly a quality of life impact. And what I'm hearing from you, George, is notice is good, but we're going to need to have input in the process and have engagement. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a couple minutes. Mark, do you have a comment on notice you want to make here?
Yeah, I think people need to know that right now, administrative decisions are not covered by the city attorney's language. It was in our proposal, so that, for example, taking out the trees in the open space park, changing in South Point, just taking a matter that had been dealt with before, and then administratively allowing an entrance of a hotel onto a park. Those kinds of things are administrative decisions, and right now, that has been left out of this, and I think that's a gap that we need to fill. But basically, we do need to talk about what we do once we have notice. The real balancing point to me with the city attorney was, if there's I think they don't know if there's going to be dozens and dozens of these kinds of issues that are identified. And the key determinant is, if a neighborhood association says it matters, it's an issue for their neighborhood, then the city needs to notify them. So if there are dozens and dozens of issues every month, the question is, we wanted the notice to be targeted so that your area would know what's relevant to you and not get a big laundry list of issues. And so the bigger the more issues that there are, the more importance there is to me that list be narrowed and targeted to the geographic area that's affected. So those are the issues related to these parts of the ordinance.
Just to pick up on that, so we're still in active discussion with the city attorney, and the mayor and commission. And this is for the first phase, right, this initial ordinance. And we'll have to see what goes in this first ordinance, how it works in the real world as we proceed. Any other comments on notice at this? Tom, please.
I'm struck by how many of these things actually are in GU districts. You know, the things that the city, that the government is supposed to safeguard the most, which is the public assets, which would be the convention center, possibly a hotel, Flamingo Park. They wanted to build a 7-story parking garage or something this summer. Allison Park, North Shore Open Space Park. It's all the things that you think the government, that's where the government really should be notifying the citizens. It's supposed to be a government for and by the citizens. And instead, it's almost like they're in opposition to everybody. In the government districts especially, it's one thing if it's a private developer and he lives down the street and he wants to build a house within the existing codes. But when it's the government working against the people in the community, or at least not noticing them, it's almost like you're in opposition to your government. And that's, I think, what frustrates everybody. You say, it's in the park, it's in the other park, it's there, it's here. They're cutting down the trees. You know, that's especially when you need notice, I think, when it's anything that's in the GU districts.
Very good point. And clearly, again, to underline, at this point, that is not a right that we have. So the government's not doing anything wrong. That's not the way the system is set up. And I'm hearing some energy that we need to make sure that's addressed.
Mark,
Yeah,
one more thing to Mark's comment, that the way you can sign up for different things now is a good model to work from. You know, I can sign up for DRB but not HPB. I can sign up for the commission but not, you know, I can, and if that were expanded into, you know, different categories or whatever, that might be a movement that would work, you know.
Yeah, I think that our vision for this was that this is something in between the mandatory notice that goes out on specific projects and the broad notice that goes out when there's a big agenda of something, and it is intended to us that if your neighborhood is online, that you can go on and get the same notices that your neighborhood gets, and that those notices would be fairly targeted to include the things that are in and around your neighborhood. That's what we're shooting for. We're trying, one of the reasons we're doing this is an ordinance. We don't want to, we're not trying to stop government. We just want to give it some speed bumps, as my friend David Durham would say. So this is a balancing process, and I think that that's to be tested out. I don't see electronically why it would be that difficult to identify where issues are impacting and have them targeted through mapping.
Great. Let me turn to the audience. Any questions about quality of life impacts that we're talking about, or this idea of getting targeted notice?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Adam Shedroff. I live at 16th and Drexel. My dad came here in 1936 and started attending Fisher School, and the whole family moved here in 1943. So like Miami Beach a great deal. A couple of comments with respect to targeting first to get information early. Right now, across the street from me, there's a great idea to build across the street from our home and our apartment a entertainment and dining and nightclub venue, which will be open until 2 in the morning and will feature indoor and outdoor music, and will feature the ability to have DJs and live music and concerts until 1 in the morning every weekday and 2 in the morning every night. Now, we found out about this by looking in the paper, and we saw 2 weeks beforehand that this is going to be before the HPB and it's going to be before the planning board. Now, the HPB staff and the planning board staff are great, and since then they've given very good information. But the interesting thing was when I went into the planning board and I said, so what's going on? It seems that, you know, it didn't say that in the notice. It just said, well, there are going to be some changes and the applicant wants to apply for an entertainment license. I went in, and the first thing I asked is, why did it take you so long to come in and see about it? And I said, how can that be? It was only in the paper 2 weeks ago. And they said, well, we told the applicant when they applied 3 months ago that they should talk to people in the neighborhood, and that you lived across the street. Didn't the attorney come and talk to you? And oddly, they didn't. Their business is not doing that. The first time...
Probably talked to one person and they went back and said, oh no, we did it. And that's what it had usually go.
No, I can tell you exactly what happened, but it was actually worse than that. What they did is they made an appointment with the neighborhood association. The planning board won't approve something unless it goes before the neighborhood association. They applied to go, they asked to come on a Friday afternoon, they asked to come to the Monday meeting of the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association, the last meeting before the planning board meeting. So in fact, with 2 weeks to look at a life-changing situation. You know, we're all people, my parents are old. I'm sorry, I'm ill. I have children. It's very difficult with 2 weeks' notice to look at it. So I think that well, I like what the planning board does and the historic preservation board, or the staff at least. I think we need more notice. Now, looking at this briefly at this situation, let me just mention, somebody had a really great idea. In Lisbon, during the financial crisis, they noticed that in the downtown industrial area, there was a dilapidated farmer's market that wasn't doing well. So they decided to revitalize the farmer's market, make it an entertainment venue with DJs, music, concerts that last half the night, and so forth, and it worked out very well. Within a couple of months, it became the 5th largest tourist attraction in Portugal, with over 1 million people visiting every month. So naturally, the idea now is to put one in Miami Beach at the corner of 16th and Drexel, in sorry, what's the name of the garage, Jeff?
It's the Enrique Norton Garage.
The Norton Garage, and the Norton Garage. Now, of course, this will be extremely disruptive to us. I'm trying to repeat, but it's even worse than just the obvious part. There's already virtually no parking in the area. When people come to this venue, let me say it just a bit. When this venue was built 5 or 6 years ago, it was approved to have one restaurant with maybe 100 or 130 seats and no more. They're requesting it to be expanded to 550 seats to use the entire area and have it open until 2 in the morning. Now, already there's no parking in the neighborhood, so when people come, naturally they're going to park and fill the neighborhood when they can during the day. So it's not just the noise, but that. It's a situation where people will be leaving at 2 in the morning and walking through the neighborhood. So we'll hear dogs and so forth and people talking, but even worse, and this is something that Commissioner Esposito brought up, it's really important, and that is that there are plans and there are actions that people can take if there's noise from the venue. But what happens when you have a 550 seat restaurant, people go outside and smoke and talk and chat and drink outside at 2 in the morning. And the simple solution to that is, it's not our fault. We can't do anything about it. We ask the people to be quiet. It destroys the neighborhood, and nothing happens. If the planning board passes it, they simply don't give consideration to that issue. So these are really important issues. I'm gonna pass around these. If anyone would like more information, please put your phone number or email address on it.
Clearly, quality life impacts, clearly notice is a critical issue in that. Who else has a thought on quality life impacts or notice? We go back here.
My name is Tim Boreski. Some of you have seen me. I've been somewhat involved in bicycle safety advocacy for many years now. Specifically on the subject of notice, there's the issue of deliberately misrepresenting things. An agenda item from the City Commission meeting, in one of them in 2014, was accept the recommendation to ensure bicycle lane is continuous and navigable on 16th Street. That sounds like a good thing until you read the fine print in it and find out that they were throwing away the previous plans to actually improve the bike safety, and they were just going to paint it green. So there's the issue where even when they're providing the legally required notice, it's not done in a way that's honest and helpful, and wondering if there's any thoughts on how that can be addressed.
Any comments from the panel? Clearly, the integrity of the notice is critical. Does anyone have a direct comment on that?
The heading of a government initiative is not always the result of the initiative. For example, on the way here tonight, I saw on my phone that the county has just taken a step with the SMART plan. Does everybody know what the SMART plan is? That is a proposed 89-mile expansion of rail in Dade County at a cost of $6 billion. If anybody does any type of light searching on the internet for rail, they will quickly see that as a passenger application, it is mostly a failure. But yet they've labeled it smart.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. Let me keep us moving here. So we've talked about quality of life impacts. Now you've gotten your notice. You at least now hopefully a notice with integrity to the last comment. Here's the next key point. Opportunities for input. Today, the city does not have an obligation. So all that government stuff we talked about, whether it's a park, whether it's something going on the beach, there is no obligation per se that residents need to be engaged. Now sometimes they may be, and that could be a very productive thing, but that's not the way the system is designed. So as we think about the future, we'd like to see that residents aren't just presented to when the answer's sort of cooked, but are part of the process, that they are engaged. If there's a task force going on studying the feasibility of light rail or changes in a park, when that task force gets on, maybe residents should be part of that up front. If we're going to talk about raising streets in Bayshore, we don't want to see it when the plan is already done and it's on a flyer. You want to be there early. You want to be engaged throughout the process. And there are examples where the city has used that collaborative approach, and it's worked well. But that's not the way it's set up today. We envision in this process more opportunities for input, be it serving on task force or ongoing dialogue and process during planning. Let me turn it over to the panel. First, will this help? Second, what suggestions do you have? And then we'll hear from the audience.
Well, you're right. Right now, the city attorney has taken out the proposal that resident associations should be participants in the appointed task forces. I think that's important. It also, right now, has taken out the private applications for development, the ability to give timely input onto those. We do have notice in the next section of them, but not really the opportunities specifically there to engage. And also implementation. Some of these issues are city-driven processes, like streetscapes and so forth, and it's not clear if the attorney is restricting it to certain types of issues. It's not clear yet how residents are engaged, and we'd like to detail that in this ordinance. So again, we'd like your participation in making sure that this language gets done.
Other comments from the panel on opportunities for input during the plan? Tom?
First of all, I just want to say thank God for the activist community here, because when we were doing our thing, Frank Del Vecchio gave me good advice, and Marianne came to our meetings, because there's two things that happen with it's besides the opportunity to speak, but you have to be almost a lawyer to get to the bottom of the thing that when you did read it, and the average person is saying, what does it mean? Now that I'm kind of involved, what does it mean? What's the fine details? So you almost need an advocate for the public that will put it in plain language for them to understand. Like you were talking about the swale before, and if it goes down 2 degrees, the average person is not going to understand what that means for their property, or the smart plan, or something else. But the other thing is when you actually show up to the meeting, and you have your time to speak, which most of the time is during the day, so people are working, the average citizen doesn't show up, that just is involved in their community. And then second of all, there's no way of knowing who the people that get up to speak represent really the voice of the community or not. It's kind of like there's just a line, the first 3 people get up and they might get their chance. In our particular issue, when we did that, there was one guy that didn't represent anything that the majority of the community wanted, and was very upset and mad. And then that is painted as the whole community. It almost would be like there would be a plant almost or something, you say, and everybody say, well, that guy, wow, that's a little bit crazy with what they want. And so, and there's 3 people. I mean, I've been at commission meetings now a lot of times where I've been standing in line or waited all day, and it's either no discussion or, sorry, we took 3 from this side, we took 3 from that side, and it's done. I don't know what the solution is, because the meetings can't last forever. But then the other thing is that they have something like North Shore Open Space Park, and they have a nice meeting, and a lot of people show up. But that message never gets carried through to the public meeting. It's not like anybody's just sitting there taking notes and saying, the community doesn't want trees cut down. Okay, that was represented at the thing. You know, I don't know the solution, but I know it's a real problem. Because there's very, very little opportunity to really get up there and say, and when there is opportunity, it's at a time that makes it inconvenient for your average citizen to show up. You gotta be a lobbyist or some other type of position, retired.
Linda?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point with how you can kill anything or enliven it through constant meetings. We had really good input at the community meeting. And then neighborhoods, I guess, which was 2 days later, didn't have as many people there. And when it's talked about in other venues, you don't know what they're referring to because there's no requirement for them to take the input and actually make a record of it, put it somewhere. So it just kind of goes out into the, I don't know how many meetings I've been to about a skate park in North Beach. They'll just keep having meetings until they get the answer that they want. And you can't go to all of them, and it's not a record. So I know that that's labor intensive and that adds something to it, but I wish when there were opportunities for input, there were opportunities to hold on to what people said, what was expressed, instead of just moving on to the next one because the input wasn't exactly what they wanted.
That's a great point. So we heard about the importance of having a record, that we're talking in English, but not all of us here are lawyers, that we want to make sure it's clear, and then Tom gave us a nice foreshadowing when we talk about what happens in meetings. But let's hear a little bit from the audience on opportunities for input. Did you have a comment? Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, thank you, panel, for your contributions and for your activism. We're very grateful. My name is David Gollum. I live on Parkview Island in North Beach. And my pet peeve, and what I'd like to raise with you, is what I perceive as the undue influence of non-resident developers. I think of two particular examples in North Beach, Ocean Terrace and Tatum Waterway, where non-resident developers are buying up, and we, as you pointed out, have little input. I've been to those meetings too, where there's a high-powered former mayor of the city as a lobbyist, and you just get snowed, even though I've been at meetings where 10, 15 people do talk, and the commission gets up and wanders around. And so I wonder what you think of the idea of trying to institute a full-time commission, that is, commissions that are paid a good salary, instead of this pretend part-time commission that we have, who all the goodwill in the world have to be subject to influence by moneyed interests outside. So to me, it seemed like one possibility. Maybe those who are considering running for commission shouldn't respond, but maybe that's a way of dealing with it, so that the money that's behind these motions and these movements is cut off at the knees.
Thank you. So let's break that into, first, the excess influence of developers who may or not be residents of Miami Beach. What do we do about that? And then we'll come to the second part in a second. Someone from the panel want to touch on that? Michael.
I think this is right at the heart of the issue that the folks you're talking about and many other special interests have an outsized influence as compared to residents. And I think the most important thing is that we all are really careful about who our elected officials are, and that they understand that we're the voters. They work for us, and that's where their loyalty should be first. Residents first. That's what I think.
So I think the answer has to begin with the resident associations.
and that what we need to do is continue to strengthen their role, strengthen their visibility and the responsiveness of the commissioners to the resident associations. And this approach is not changing governmental electoral processes, but it is designed to strengthen the knowledge and engagement, and therefore the power and the desire to be involved in your neighborhood association. I think that will create a positive virtuous cycle, which will have some mitigating impact on the deeper issues that you're raising.
Okay, great. Anything else in terms of, one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
Let me just throw something out there. How about saying that if you are a campaign manager, you cannot lobby a city? Unfortunately, you talk about spheres of influence, but as you work with someone over a period of time, and there are some very effective campaign managers out there, you're going to build a certain relationship with that individual. I am not saying that there should not be contact, but what I'm saying is, in order to leave a level playing field for the residents, have the paid political analyst or paid, not be able to lobby the city. Similarly, like elected officials cannot lobby the city or do anything with the city for a period of a minimum period of 2 years post they're leaving the city. Why not have a similar ordinance where an analyst, a manager for race cannot lobby the city? That starts to erode at those spheres of influence, because it's not now the elected official, but it's now the connection and the availability of this individual to put himself out there and say, hey, I ran 4 campaigns, all of which were successful and elected to office. Now it's pay-to-play time.
Just a comment, there are clearly a lot of different ways to tackle the problem of the outsized influence of special interests. There are clearly some things we could look at politically, a couple ideas floating around. They may be worthy of their own discussion. Again, just to bring it back to where we are here, we're talking about something from an ordinance and charter that elevates the role of the residents. And these are other things that could go on, but I just want to be clear on sort of where we are in the focus here. Any other comments on quality input at this point? Because we're going to hit to the last sort of major theme here is procedural fairness. And Tom brought this up. Today what happens is, you have an item, and if you've learned about it, you're not really sure where it's going to come up. It could be on an agenda, but most items do not have what's called a time certain. So you're not certain of time. Also, Tom brought up another issue with today's system. Most of these meetings take place during the day. But for someone who has a standard 8 to 5, 9 to 5 job, it's tough to make it. Often at the meetings, we heard this from David's comment, the developer has a lot of time, or someone's making a case, or maybe the city is making their case for what they want to do. Residents could be heard, but they may be limited to 3 minutes. They may not have the full time to make their case. These are some of the issues. And what we want to make sure is that residents have a fair seat at the table. If there's a hearing, it shouldn't be just the last little, and what did the residents say? It should be sitting right there with the other folks, because it's your neighborhood. We call that procedural fairness. So I want to hear from the panel whether procedural fairness is going to help, and what suggestions or ideas you have around it.
One of my early experiences, like I mentioned, when I was quickly silenced by the mayor, I would sat in the front row for 5 hours, wore a nice shirt and pants, and 5 hours for the last item of the night. So procedural fairness, a little bit more in the realm of expectations as far as when you get there and when you'll be heard, etc. and so on, would be a step forward.
So there's some rights in here that address it, and there's some dilution of those rights that's happening that also concerns me. There is already in quasi-judicial hearings, although people don't know it, a right to present and rebut evidence and to have time to do that. We proposed that in general in all of these kinds of hearings, and the city attorney is pulling it back to only be so in quasi-judicial hearings. We provided the opportunity to obtain time certain, and the court obtained was struck, so now we have the ability to request a time certain. Well, we already have that ability. So right now, this whole procedural fairness has been fundamentally diluted, and I have concerns about that, and I would hope that some of you do too.
I think time certain is critical, and we know that the people who get the time certains, of course,
but will be on an email, and when there is an issue, we can expand the number of people who get the information, and then have that ability that they have now where you can actually say you're signing a petition online just by typing in your name, and then all of these lists of people who have a voice and have a statement to make when they're going to the commission, the petitions can be provided or sent to the commissioners rather than one person. Seems like it's one person speaking for himself. Am I being naive about this? I mean, it seems like that seems logical. That's one thing I had to say. And the second thing I wanted to ask is, does anyone have information for Adam about what he should do? Because it sounds like he's like a one-man band here with his movement.
Okay, good questions. I'll open both up to our illustrious panel. First, the idea of grassroots activism, email petitions. Who wants to take a shot at that, Tom?
Look, you're right, and most of the people here have done that. I mean, our petition had like 6,000 people sign it online, and we had an email chain of 500 people. And that's the only way you got really get the word out. You know, there's a downside to that in that I had fake Facebook profiles put on me. I had fake profiles put on all kinds of weird dating sites. I had, people insulting me all over. I was like, man, politics in Miami Beach is dirty business here. But, it happens. Commissioner Greco knows a little bit what I'm talking about, I think, on social media. But before that, the point is, you have to know what's happening before you get to the petition and everything else. So the important part is, in order to be able to build that movement, you have to know. 2 weeks is not enough time to get it done, you need 3 months or 4 months or 5 months time leeway to get the word out. Unfortunately, and I think everybody else had the same experience, is you feel like the activist feels like they're doing the job of the city, which is getting the word out of what's really happening. And when people find out, you can either be on the right side or the wrong side of that. Maybe nobody else agrees with you. Maybe you're just blowing in the wind. But when you have overwhelming support through social media or whatever, that's when you know you're on the right side of things. And the question really is, why do I got to be the person doing this? How come the city's not doing it for the community and getting the word out? That's the frustrating.
In answer to both your questions, I think the approach that we're trying to build here is to create an empowered neighborhood association that has special standing and ability to speak, so that every person on every issue doesn't have to scramble so hard to find out information or to get signatures. If we have it so that the neighborhood associations make a resolution in support or opposition to something that affects their quality of life, we're trying to streamline the process. So all you would need to do is go to your neighborhood association once a month, participate in those meetings, support those resolutions that they're taking, and make your life simpler. That's what we're shooting for here. And if people can speak out to make this, involve your neighborhood associations now in the next 6 weeks to make this stronger, I think it will, again, save you from some of the self-help petition building steps, because a lot of things can be headed off by just having respected neighborhood associations that are informed and engaged at an early point.
Is anyone familiar with the specifics of the situation that Adam brought up in his neighborhood? If anyone has a specific idea or thought to that point?
On that piece, on Adam's point, or?
Yeah, what Adam needs is a pro bono lobbyist.
Okay.
That's really what he needs.
A pro bono lobbyist, okay.
Somebody that the members of the current commission have to see.
Mark Frank has raised his hand.
Okay. Right.
So what residents need and what neighborhood associations need is a public interest law firm. If you get these notices, neighborhood association officers don't know what they mean, they don't know what the law is, they can't go to DRB, HPB, planning board meetings, 4 city commission committees where legislation and special interest legislation is proposed, and city commission meetings. They can't do it. Developers have their law firms. Public Works Department has its law firm, that's the city attorney's office. But you don't. You're going to be overwhelmed if I would give you everything you want if I were a city commissioner. I would dump it all on you. You would have a stack of materials. You couldn't deal with it. Each of you would expire. Poor Adam Shedroff. Where does he go? They should have known weeks ago, but if he even had known, who was going to help him? Me? Yeah. So instead of giving the money to political candidates, instead of donating to PACs, get some of the smart lawyers around. There's some in this room. Michael Grieco is an ingenious attorney. Well, you know, I'm not kidding. I'm not recommending this, but there are politician attorneys who are drawn to public service because they want to make a difference. You need to really have some clout. Could be a foundation, could be a PAC, it could be an accumulation of pro bono attorneys who are organized by some people who know what they're doing, attorneys in politics. Many of them are retired, but you're going to be overwhelmed. You need somebody with equal standing at every stage of the process. And you are just heading for being overwhelmed. The worst thing that can happen to you is if you get this ordinance enacted, then you're all going to be overwhelmed with responsibilities as a neighborhood association director. You need help.
Thank you, Frank. I guess the key takeaway there is be careful what you wish for. We are up against our time, so I just want to sort of wrap up here. First off, thank you. You've been a great audience. I hope you now have a little bit of sense of the need to know and why we think an initiative, albeit with the help that would be needed, is so important. We want your involvement. Contact Miami Beach United, miamibeachunited@gmail. Find our website, miamibeachunited.org, on Facebook. You met many of our directors. Contact me. We want your input. If you're part of a neighborhood association or civic group that you think would find this important and interesting, let us know. We would welcome your support. We'd like to get neighborhood associations that will say, we support the concept of the Residents' Right to Know initiative. So we would welcome your help with that. In terms of next steps, as we sort of described, it's a 3-step process. Step 1, we are actively working to get this ordinance. We'll be in front of the Neighborhoods Committee tomorrow morning, fighting the good fight. We do believe that we can get this ordinance passed. Then we'll see how it works in the real world, including how overwhelmed we may be. And finally, we will look to put it in the charter. We think the timing is perfect for this. We are in an election season. We had candidates and elected officials here. This is something that matters a lot to residents. Done well, it can have a lot of impact. So I want to thank Stephen Hurwitz, and let's give a round of applause to Mark Needle and our panel.
job. Our next public event is on April 20th. We are going to talk about the character of cities. We're going to be right here. We've got a great panel, another in-depth discussion, and also a special event we have for our dues-paying members is on March 21st. So for those of you members, look for that invite, and we hope others of you who maybe have attended our events but not yet joined, we would ask you to strongly consider joining MBU. We really could use your support, and thank you for all of you attending tonight.